we become a force for good, making life better for everybody in the Valley. With your support, I'm proud to say that in our history, which is now 32 years long, we've distributed $120 million in grants and scholarships. Just last week, $532,000 in scholarship awards to our best and brightest kids alone. But beyond, strategic and thoughtful writing of checks, an important part of our job is to build a stronger sense of community and a better informed community. And one way to do that is by funding research and then starting conversations about what that research means for our community, always in an even-handed, nonpartisan way with the help of outside experts like our special guest, Dr. Valerie Lacarte from Migration Policy Institute. So, 14 years ago this week, in this very room, we released MPI's first immigration study about Napa County. And we funded the study because, starting in the 1980s and accelerating thereafter, a change in our local economy precipitated a rather dramatic shift in our demography. But there was little to no local conversation about what these changes might mean for our collective future in the Valley. And so for clarity's sake, what I mean when I talk about these changes is shifting from the Napa that was a sleepy little blue-collar town where the major employers were Mare Island Naval Shipyard, Kaiser Steel, and Napa State, where the population was 92% white, to a globally celebrated center for wine and hospitality, where Mexican immigrants have been a vital and growing segment of our labor force. Meanwhile, in this era, 2012, 14 years ago, the issue of immigration was increasingly a polarizing hot potato at a national level. This was the era of Sheriff Joe Arpaio's Show Me Your Paper law, SB 1070 in Arizona. And honestly, our intent was to both inform our community and, in a way, to protect it from the corrosive nature of that national conversation as best we were able. So, as I like to say, we tried to pick up the hot potato of immigration with the oven mitts of objective third-party data. What did we learn in that study? I won't drag you through the whole thing. The bottom line is that immigrants are an important part of our economy and our community because they're overrepresented in the workforce. They drive a lot of positive economic things for our community. They pay taxes and consume government services at a rate commensurate with their share of population and so forth. So you've done a report. What do you do with it? In our case, we did not let it sit on a shelf. Instead, we made the biggest bet that I have made in my 22 years of running this community foundation. We launched a program called the One Napa Valley Initiative in order to close a gap that was identified in the study of a dozen years ago. That was, we had 9,000 people in this community who were legal permanent residents or green card holders, but they tended to obtain citizenship at a rate starkly lower than their foreign-born peers around the state of California. 30% here, 37% in the rest of California. And with help from many of you in this room, we have now, over these years, starting in 2013, poured nearly $4 million into the effort. And when I say we, what I really mean is you who are donors and our community partners who actually do the work. We just write the checks. So at this time, I would like to ask Esme Gil, who is here from Puertas Abiertas, to please stand, and Alicia Abdo, who's here from On the Move, to please stand. And is Maddie Hernandez in the house from IIBA? I think she's coming. There's Maddie Hernandez. And in absentia, Jenny Ocone from Up Valley Family Center. So it's these hardworking women and their hardworking people who have helped nearly 3,000 people in our community obtain citizenship since we all started this some years ago. And today, in addition to doing things which are aspirational in nature, like naturalization, our wonderful nonprofit partners are working to address misinformation and fear among our immigrant neighbors to ensure that people know their rights and obligations under the U.S. Constitution, even if they are not citizens or green card holders, to ensure the safe custody of minor U.S.-born children should their undocumented parents go to work one day and not come home, via family preparedness plans and so forth. So in short, we are doing things that are aspirational and also things that are protective, like Know Your Rights. And because the work is broader and it involves a broader set of community stakeholders, the school system, major employers, law enforcement, and shout out to my sheriff's deputies who are there in the back, thank you. It operates under a new handle called Napa Valley Together. And I want to say three things about that before I move on. First, to meet a very significant spike in demand that has been caused by the enforcement climate that we're currently living through, we have increased our contribution to this effort on an annual basis from $200,000 to $500,000. And our partners have also increased their staffing in order to meet this moment. And I would say our $500,000 is nice, but it ain't the whole enchilada. So part of the reason Secret Agenda is now disclosed that I asked these women to stand up is I'd like you to meet them if you're a donor, because you should get to know their work separate and apart from the Community Foundation. The second thing I want to say is that our involvement doesn't mean that we condone someone's having overstayed a visa or crossed the border without authorization. But having said that, these are overwhelmingly civil, not criminal offenses. And we are deeply troubled by both the rhetorical framing of criminal aliens as a category of people that we can demonize and such, as well as the manner in which otherwise law-abiding non-citizens are being detained without warrants, held without bail, and deported without due process. Finally, in a minute, you're going to hear from Valerie, and there are going to be some things in the data set that are kind of uplifting about how immigrants here are faring compared to some of their neighbors in other places. This is both true and it's good. At the same time, our data runs through 2023. In other words, it predates the second Trump administration. So simply put, there's more work to be done. All is not puppies and sunshine. A lot's changed since 14 years ago. In Napa, we've seen 3 major wildfires, an earthquake, the pandemic, the challenges facing the wine industry, and so forth. As a nation, I'm sad to say we are more deeply divided than once we were. I rode here with my good friend and a former board member, Dave Gaw, who's sitting in the back. And Dave was actually the chair of this board when, 14 years ago, we put out this report and launched the One Napa Valley campaign. And I will never forget that meeting for as long as I live on this earth. It was late August 2012. The board was worried, perhaps appropriately, about how what we were doing might be perceived. We wrestled with how to talk about what we were doing, how to frame it. But when the vote came, the vote was unanimous. And immediately after the meeting, Dave boarded a United Airlines flight to Tampa, Florida for the Republican National Convention. And my then treasurer, Richard Macy, got into a polka-dotted recreational vehicle and drove to Burning Man. And I would like to think that that habit of having a balanced board that represents reasonable political views in this community abides, and indeed it does to this day. So on the ride over, Dave said, you know, do you think we can still talk about this stuff in this climate in the same way that we did back then? I believe we can. In fact, I believe we must. Indeed, it's part of our job at the foundation to identify issues that are percolating just a bit below the surface, sort of like the things that go unsaid at Thanksgiving dinner. Because as with earthquake science, it's the tension beneath our feet that can be an imminent sign of movement. And we want to get ahead of that movement as best we can and channel it in the direction of the public good. So before I pass the mic to Valerie, and sorry this is taking longer than usual, I want to flag 2 things that she's going to talk about. One of them makes me happy, one of them makes me worry. The thing that makes me happy is that we have seen a dramatic increase in the number of people in Napa who are citizens. Back then, that number was 30%. Today, it is 48%. So shout out. In all fairness, that is both about legal permanent residents being pulled through a complicated process by our dear friends and grantee partners, as well as undocumented residents being pushed out of the county because they can't afford to live here. So both of those things are at play. The thing that has me worried is just our overall population, the stagnation of population growth and a fairly sharp decline in our immigrant population, about which more in a second from Valerie. That population's gone down by like 9.5%, which has implications for our schools, our economy, and so forth. So, about Valerie, Dr. Lacarte is a senior policy analyst at the Migration Policy Institute, which is this nonpartisan, nonprofit research organization that only does this stuff in DC. Prior to joining MPI, she was a postdoctoral fellow at the Institute for Women's Policy Research and had worked previously at the Organization of American States and the IADB, the Inter-American Development Bank. She earned her BA in economics from the University You know this already, Mr. Pingatore, a fellow Canadian expatriate in our midst, University of Quebec at Montreal, and her master's at the University of Montreal, and her Ph.D. in economics from American University. So all the way from Washington, please help me extend a warm welcome to Dr. Valerie Lacarte.
Thank you.
Thank you. Where is it? Do I hand it to you? Oh, you got it? Okay.
Thank you. Should I just put? That was just a clip. Should be able to figure that out. Hello, hi everyone. I'm so glad to be here. It's a wonderful community, obviously very beautiful, and I want to thank the foundation for supporting our work, for having me here, and my colleagues who are co-authors and who could not be here, Michael Fix and Ali Rutland. This report comes, of course, as you know, as a second edition, as was discussed, so I'm going to move on right away and delve into this report. The first report was really, oh, I think I need to stop a second. This one? Okay, so I have to stay like this? Ah, even better. This good? Okay. This report, the first report really laid the foundation of understanding the immigrant communities here in Napa County. This second report is a lot more targeted. So there are essentially three questions that we ask. One, we want to see who are Napa County's immigrants and their children. So we're updating a lot of the data points that were there last time. We want to see how do immigrants in and around the county participate in the workforce of Napa County. And then we ask, like, what would it cost the economy if immigrant workers could no longer fill certain jobs? I'm going to have a lot of data here and there in terms, et cetera, but when we get to the Q&A, I'd be happy to clarify. And also, buenas tardes a los hispanohablantes. Si tienen preguntas, tenemos un intérprete, and I'll be happy to help there too. So the research is built around three pillars, I would say, in terms of methods that we used. A lot of what I'm going to talk about is drawing from the American Community Surveys from the Census Bureau, 5 years of pooled data, some other administrative sources. We also at MPI have a methodology that we've developed to identify legal statuses that are more precise than those that you would find in national databases. And so you'll definitely see some data points there. And we used an input-output model. We did some economic modeling to simulate different shocks to the labor market. So you'll see a little bit of all of that in our report. Well, let's start here. Who are Napa's immigrants? Just describing the demographics and the origins of the communities, which you know very well. But a few of the highlights from the report, in terms of the total county population, we're estimating that there was about 135,000 people up to 2023, and that 21% of the county residents were foreign-born, so equivalent to 29,000 people. Another number that stands out is that 48,000 Napa County residents are Latino origin. Most of them, 62% of them, were born in the United States. And looking at children, so everyone under 18 years old, there are about 12,000 children of immigrants in the county. Those are just some of the highlights, but we'll get into it. So in terms of origins, of course, as you know, about 57% of all immigrants were born in Mexico. And it's about 2/3 if you think of all of the Latin American and Caribbean region as an origin. It's 2/3 of all immigrants who come from this region. But there's also 23% of immigrants who come from Asia and primarily from the Philippines. Importantly, 3/4 of immigrants in the county have lived in the United States for more than 20 years. So we're looking at a long settled community that is primarily Latino. And in fact, the corollary to that is that only 8% of all immigrants have been in the country for less than 10 years. So there are very few recent immigrants, which is different than what we're seeing at the national level, right? Now, another feature of those recent immigrants is that even though they're fewer, but they're also different in terms of their ethnicity. They tend to be less Latino. So if you looked at the immigrants from the last 10 years who have arrived in the US in the last 10 years and live here in Napa County, 53% of them are not Latino. And that was the opposite before. For the immigrants who are more settled, as we talked about, 2/3 of them were Latino. So there's a bit of a shift in terms of the numbers and the origins. English proficiency, we look at several metrics, of course, of indicators of integration. English proficiency is an important one. It's important to say that nearly half of all immigrants are English proficient. So they either speak English at home or they speak English very well. But what we categorize as limited English proficiency affects 52% of the immigrant population. So those are people who said in the surveys, the census surveys, that they either don't speak English at all, they speak not well, or well. The age distribution is something that comes up that I think is salient in the report. There are several indicators that show that the immigrant populations overall, the median age is older than the US-born county resident population. And there's a few factors there that explain that. One is that there are very few immigrant children. So there are only 3% of the children, if you take the overall immigrant population, only 3% of them are children, so born abroad, right? On the other hand, you have the same share of older citizens, 65 and older, I should say, who are, I said citizens, residents, excuse me, who are immigrant and US born. So it's a fifth of the US born population is 65 and older, and a fifth of immigrants are 65 and older. In the middle, though, that prime working age population, which is so crucial to the economy here, 71% of immigrants find themselves in that age bracket, which is far higher than in the US born, amongst the US born population, which is 46%. So 71% versus 46%. But overall, that does mean that the immigrant population is pulling, towards being older than the US born. The children, I said that there are fewer children who were born abroad, but the children of immigrants here are a very important part of the county's children population. So if you look at all of the children in the county, 47% of them have an immigrant parent. So that's very important. So that really means that the backbone of the economy, of the community really, has immigrant ancestry, and we will see other indicators too of the importance. And so we looked at the county also in terms of the children who are in the K through 12 education system, for instance. There we can't get foreign-born status, but we can get ethnicity. And if you look at all the children who are in the K through 12 system, 59% of them identify as Latino. So you can see the next generation and the population in the years to come. In terms of legal status, very important point that was mentioned is that 48% of the immigrant population are naturalized citizens. Now, the other share, the other categories that are important also are the lawfully present non-citizens, so everybody else who's a non-citizen and who has some legal status. I should say precisely green card holders and those who are visa holders. We find that there are about 26% of them. And then 25% of the Napa County residents who are immigrants are unauthorized immigrants. The way we categorize unauthorized immigrants and are given our data limitations too and our definitions It does include people who may have some form of legal protection from deportation and who have a work authorization like DACA holders or TPS holders, but they are accounted for in this 25%. It's important to say again that the share of naturalized citizens is far higher in this report compared to the last, but as was mentioned, there are different factors as well. Importantly, the naturalization assistance that has been consistent here, but there are also other factors in terms of people moving out of the county. And we can see that in other points here. We talked about the importance of children of immigrants. Well, mixed status families are a crucial part of Napa County's fabric. What we did is we looked at everyone who has a legal status. And we estimated how many people who hold a legal status, so it could be US citizens and the lawfully present. And we estimated how many of these people live with at least one unauthorized immigrant person in their household. And we found that 10,000 people are in that situation. So there's at least 10,000 people who live in a mixed status family. And 4,000 of these people are children. And if you look at themselves, of course, you won't be surprised if I tell you that they themselves are, 9 out of 10 of them are US citizens, right? Based on everything we've been talking about. We looked at low-income families and their access to social safety nets. And overall, about a quarter of immigrants in Napa County fall below, meet the definition of low income in the sense that their family income is below 200% of the federal poverty level. There are certainly differences by ethnicity that are stark. So for instance, I said 25%, yes, for immigrants overall, but let's see if this pointer's gonna work. Yeah, I don't know if you can see it though, I can barely see it. But if you look at Latino immigrants specifically, it's 31% of them who have low incomes. And for non-Latino immigrants, it's 16%. So there is this divide that comes up in a lot of the data points, in fact. I'm not going to show all of them, but you will be able to see it in the report, which was launched. I don't know if I actually said that, but it's online, and you have the link in your documents. Something else we should say that's on the positive and important is that the health insurance coverage rates are higher for immigrants here in Napa County, especially if we compare to the statewide average. So we found that 89% of immigrants have health insurance, and whether we break by Latino immigrant or not, those coverage rates are higher than their peers in the state, which are already high compared to the national average. So that's a good sign. And we do find, as we find in other studies often, that low-income immigrants tend to use public benefits at a lower rate than their US born who are in the same income range. That's something that comes up often, and we found that for Medicaid, SSI, and SNAP, the food stamps. And still in thinking of integration, we looked at household income. The median household income for immigrants was at $108,000. That was $30,000 lower than the US born residents in Napa County, but it was higher than the statewide averages, so you know the community better than I do and what that means. And we looked at these figures as well based on Latino ethnicity, and we found similar gaps than what I mentioned earlier. We also looked at home ownership, and about 58% of immigrants own their homes. And it's interesting to see also the differences in ownership, in home ownership by legal status. So for instance, if you look at the unauthorized immigrants, the ownership rate is at 27%, but for naturalized citizens is at 72%. right? So it's a huge difference, and it does echo what we would expect in terms of the benefits of naturalization and also the barriers to ownership and documentation when someone lacks documentation. So that's consistent. And so when we look at all of these factors, amongst others, I would say it's a mixed picture since the 2012 report. There are lower shares of low-income immigrants overall. There is higher health insurance coverage. Relatively flat home ownership rates, I would say, because it has increased a little bit, I think by about 3 percentage points. But given the dynamics of the market when it comes to owning and the affordability, it's not surprising either that it hasn't increased dramatically with, let's say, the naturalization data that we would expect. And there are persistent disparities by ethnicity. And so now I'm going to move on to the immigrant workforce. And I want to say here, it's very important to understand from the beginning that what's particular and was accounted for in this report when it comes to Napa County is that, like, typically, if you read a report about labor force, and I tell you in the city, in Minneapolis or whatnot, you would think that I'm talking about people who are living there automatically. But it's important in a place like Napa County especially to account for the workforce in terms of really who is contributing despite the fact that they may not be living in the county. And so that's what we did in this report. When we're talking about the workforce, the total workforce is about 70,000 workers, total workforce, not just the immigrants, aged between 18 to 64 years old. That's who we focused on. And it does include all people who work in Napa, whether they reside in the community, in the county or not. And we found that 29% of all workers are immigrants. In other words, they are overrepresented in the workplace, because we just said there were 21% of the overall population, right? And here's a breakdown between different ways that you could see it, but this is a breakdown between also Latino origin. So you see that the highest share is still non-Latino US born, 52% of the workers fall in that category. But Latino immigrants are 21%, the other 8% are non-Latino immigrants, that makes 29%. And then you have the Latino US born who are almost 20% as well. So there's a growing share of Napa's workforce that commutes into the county. And this affects immigrants disproportionately. For instance, overall there are 24,000 people who are commuters out of that 70,000 that I mentioned. And there are 8,000 immigrants who are workers who live outside the county, mainly in Solano County and in Sonoma. Now, we look at the rate of the share of commuters by US born versus foreign born. And there are a lot of US born workers who also commute, right? But it's 32% of the US born workers who are commuters compared to 38% of immigrants. So it does affect them more disproportionately, and we compared also with the last report, and you could see that that was the trend. So overall, if we look at a 13-year period or so since 2010, the number of immigrants who both live and work in the county has dropped by 11%. Okay? So the county residents who also work here, amongst immigrants, that has dropped by 11%. Now, the number of immigrants has declined, of immigrant workers, and the legal statuses are different too, because we looked earlier at the immigrant population in terms of Napa County residents. But if we look now at the workers and the workforce, we see that the unauthorized immigrant workers now represent a third of the workforce versus a quarter in the overall population. So they're overrepresented. So putting all of these pieces together, we can deduce that a lot of the commuters, the in-commuters, they are more likely to be unauthorized immigrants than the residents. I should also note that when we were looking back at 2010 or so, the overall number of workers has increased by about 6%, but that's mostly coming from the US-born population. Now, where do immigrants work? They work primarily in manufacturing, healthcare, and agriculture. Yes, US-born workers are still the majority in most industries that you look at, except agriculture, where it stands out. So actually, I'm going to show you right away in my next slide. These are the industries, and we broke down the legal statuses by industry, including the US-born workers. So the purple that you see shows the US-born workers. And in all industries, except agriculture, which is in the middle, US-born workers are 60 to 69% of the workforce. But in agriculture, they are 29% of the workforce. So the rest, the 71%, is between unauthorized immigrant workers, who are about 27%, and then 44% are immigrants who have some form of legal status. So green card holders, H-2A visas are very important here, of course. All of these would fit here. We should also mention, even though I'm not emphasizing in this presentation, that in healthcare and also in manufacturing, lawfully present non-citizens play a very important role in the workforce. And some more insights, there's a lot of stuff on this slide, but here's the important thing. We looked at education. So in terms of educational attainment, there were important gaps, I would say, especially along gender lines. For instance, the immigrant women who are workers here in Napa County tend to be more educated than the men. We found, for instance, that immigrant women who were workers, 30% of them had a university degree compared to 19% of the immigrant men. And on the other side, importantly, you have about 39% of the immigrant male workers who did not have a high school diploma, and 29% of the immigrant women. We also looked at full-time year-round work, which is very important for stability. And immigrants overall tend to work at higher rates, in terms of full-time year-round work. They're more likely to be full-time year-round workers than the US-born workers. And yet, even when you compare just full-time year-round workers, there are important earnings gaps that persist. So we found that immigrant workers earn 77 cents to the dollar when compared to US-born workers. So there's more on that in the report. But I'm going to move on to the last section, which is where we did some economic modeling. So this is hypothetical cases to measure. The objective here really is to have some form of measure in dollar amount of the immigrant workers' contributions. And what we did is we focused on the wine and hospitality industry, framing it as a leading sector, right, for the rest of the economy. And so we use this software called Immigrant, and it pulls from multiple databases. And but it has Napa County specific data on the industries. And we use our data from the report, from all the prior analysis, to draw assumptions and estimates that would be relevant to the immigrant workers. And we use, I would say, relatively conservative assumptions, by the way. So the outcomes, in my view, are conservative, and they could be higher. But it's better to be on that side. And what we did is that we simulated two scenarios. In the first scenario, we assumed that all immigrant workers in the wine and hospitality industry were removed from their jobs. So all the jobs are cut. And in the second scenario, we did the same, but only removing the unauthorized immigrant workers. And there are different assumptions here. I just want to say first, I say wine and hospitality industry. For all of you here, this might be very obvious what it is, but we had to construct our own definition, and we included agriculture, manufacturing, and the hospitality, food and accommodation industry. And we made several assumptions to make the model run. So here's what's important, how it would run hypothetically, right? You have an event that results in the industry suddenly losing immigrant workers, subsets of immigrant workers. And then the industry, the wine and hospitality industry, sales would drop, obviously, because they can't produce as much. The job losses, though, go beyond that industry because this wine and hospitality industry is connected to others. And so the related output of those other industries drops as well. Jobs are lost. The loss of income of the immigrant workers themselves means that their households have less disposable income. And so that has consequences on savings, investments, tax collection. And you can see where we're going, where you have reduced demand for local goods and services, so the GDP drops. That's the theory. Now, we did run the first simulation, and here are the numbers that we found. We found that based on these assumptions, if all immigrant workers in the wine and hospitality industry were removed, then $1.5 billion of the GDP would drop by $1.5 billion. And so there were about 15,000 jobs, 14,900 jobs that would be lost overall. And that was more than the jobs actually held by these immigrant workers in the wine and hospitality industry. So that means that there are other workers, including US-born workers and others who, immigrants who are lawfully residing in other industries that would be losing jobs. And then in terms of the sales of the wine and hospitality industry specifically, we found that those would drop by $2.7 billion. So that's the first hypothetical case. And some of the industries, by the way, that are connected, that came up, were included fruit farming, real estate, insurance, wholesale, warehousing, storage, wood products, glass containers. Those are some of the top ones. Now, the second simulation, which is a little closer perhaps because the first one is very hypothetical, like what would actually justify removing all immigrant workers all of a sudden from the industry, right? So we took a subset, the unauthorized immigrant workers, which does have more policy relevance, especially now. And we found that in their case, it would dampen the GDP, the local GDP, by $366 million. Again, there was more job loss than the ones that were held by these workers at 4,300, and the sales of the industry would have dropped by $1 billion. Now, the model also estimated tax collection, despite the fact that we had put a very restrictive condition that unauthorized immigrants did not pay payroll taxes, which is not necessarily true. But despite that, through their consumption and paying rent and housing, they have taxes that they pay. And we found that Napa County government and the sub-county authorities would lose about $28 million annually because of that shock to the economy. So the findings basically is that due to all these multiplier effects throughout the economy, if we were to imagine a high enforcement policy, a high immigration enforcement policy in Napa County, we can see that it would cause job losses that go beyond the targeted population, and that it would significantly reduce industry output and the GDP by as much as up to 11% from the first simulation, and that it would reduce local tax collections. So what can local actors do? There's a set of recommendations in the report, but I will just end with just reading through them. Importantly, the first two is already being done, so it's more about sustaining assistance to naturalization and to legal assistance to, considering the changing climate, landscape, I should say, in terms of policies, with special attention to mixed status families and those who have what are called liminal statuses. English language and adult education it seems very important for the workforce. So is credentials and skills recognition programs. There are more and more of those initiatives at the local level, nationally, in fact. It'll be more and more important to pay attention to health and nutrition access, given the federal cuts to public benefits programs. And finally, to examine the role of the descendants of immigrants, the adult population as well, because in this report we focused on children, but there are also a lot of adults who are descendants of immigrants. So having said that, I didn't put it here, but I am also interested in hearing perhaps from if there are initiatives that collaborate with the surrounding counties, given how important that piece also is to the dynamics of Napa County. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm here for your questions.
I forgot to say that there are cards on your seat if you want to
Yes.
ask questions. Maybe it's too late. Maybe you could just raise your hands when we do it the old-fashioned way. Or, yes, let's do it both ways. And does anybody have a question while we collect those cards? Ken?
Have these goals and objectives been shared with the county officials?
Have they?
Because it seemingly would be very helpful for them to have access to both your data and your recommendations.
I don't know if that's maybe for Terrence, that question. We haven't done it, MPI hasn't done it directly, but it's available, and I'm fairly sure it'll be shared at the local level, but thank you.
Thanks. I mean, yeah, we're going to share this, to anybody who wants to see it. And
I think you ought to go out of your way to actually send it to them.
oh yeah, we've already been in touch with the nice people sort of driving the general plan and the database data. What's it called? The baseline analysis goes in there. Baseline data. That's what it's called. I've got a question in my hand. I think I can read it. Stand up. I think this says there have been reports of significant drop in census and ACS participation in 2010 and since by undocumented 2020 among undocumented residents. Do you see?
How do you adjust for that?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for this question. That's one of our major headaches at MPI. And that's why we developed that methodology separately that pulls from other data sets as well to adjust the number of respondents in the ACS. So, and especially the year 2020, as you mentioned, was particular, and there are several organizations, including ourselves, that decided not to update our data that specific year. But then, since then, we've had other ways to correct for that. Thank you.
Okay, another question is, can we assume that naturalized immigrants have been here longer than the undocumented? And maybe this affects income and home ownership.
Well, so when we look at the data, we can see, it's like we're taking a snapshot, a picture of the population today, right? And we know who's naturalized, who are naturalized citizens in Napa County for that period, but we don't know that they were in Napa County for how long they've been specifically in Napa County. We know how long they've been in the US, but not specifically in Napa County. So I can't say with clear authority that I know that they've been around that long. And we know from the unauthorized immigrant population in general that most of them have lived in the country for a very long time. And so I think that's an interesting question that perhaps people who are here have a better sense of that for this specific community.
This is related to that idea of younger people, once they graduate, or once they're 18 or 20 or whatever, cannot afford to live here. And my hypothesis is actually that children of immigrants who become young adults are more likely to stay than children of non-Latino, local, whatever, U.S. born. But I don't know if it's true And I don't know to what extent those demographics are changing because young people are just having to leave the area.
Mhm. Yes, I've definitely heard those theories before, these hypotheses, and I do think that, like, it's clear that there's been a lot of movement also in the U.S.-born population, and also there's a question of distance. Are they just moving nearby, or are they leaving altogether, leaving the state altogether, which is also another dynamic that has been playing for in the last 10 years or so. And so I do think that that's where the collaboration perhaps with neighboring counties could provide more insight on who's actually moving and perhaps those who want to stay. Yeah.
Were any of the policymakers from Napa County, invited to this? Because I didn't happen to see any of them around here.
Well, I hate to call on our new deputy county CEO, Jennifer Palmer, for her shape. Okay, she was here a minute ago. Yeah, I mean, we invite a bunch of people, and I'm pretty sure we have most, if not all, of the elected, not every single policy person. And it's hit or miss, to be candid. Sometimes we get more than the people we're expecting. But fear not, we'll make sure they get to see it. Any other questions on this side while I'm here? Yeah.
Is there a correlation between the second home ownership here in the valley to the effect it has on the immigrant population?
Can you repeat can you repeat that?
A correlation between the second home ownership here.
Second home ownership?
Yeah. I guess what I'm getting at, because of second home ownership due to rent or
Okay.
temporary vacation,
Right.
it drives out a potential family and the ownership of that particular home.
Right, yes, okay, we did not look at that, and actually I don't think that we can in this data, but I do understand that that's one of the issues driving the prices in most of the markets when it comes to housing. But I don't have that data for this report specifically.
Do your data include information about the rents paid or housing values of the various demographic subsectors that you talked about? Is that in the bigger report?
Yes, we don't have that in this report. What we do have is just a share of people who rent versus those who own. But what you're getting at is the rent burden, for instance. Yes, we don't have that in this report. We do have it in the old report, though. So, which I shouldn't be calling old report, the 2012 report.
So I've got a question.
Yes.
So one of the things that I wrestle with in trying to make sense of all this good work you've done is some of us have been here for a very long time. And you think of county population, there must be a formula, I'm sure there is, by which we say, well, it's the number of people, who pass away is a negative, the number of people who are born is additive to the county, and then there's probably net migration in and out. But beyond that, is there any assumption made about the churn of a typical population? Meaning, yes, we're still 135,000 people. It's not the same 135,000 people, but many of you have been here, as I have been over this period. Is there any sort of wisdom about how demographers approach that question? About the dynamism of a particular settled community?
Right, so those would be flow type data, just to understand. It would be good to look at this perhaps on a year-to-year basis, really. And we can have a sense of because the net migration piece is very important. I also think that typically what I would do is probably compare to other counties other counties nearby to see what has been the overall trend, because it's clear that there's been a migration out of the county. And in fact, there are different ways to look at this data. You could also say, depending on your perspective, you could also say, well, despite all the forces coming from the real estate market, the housing market, I should say, and affordability crisis and natural disasters. And despite this fact, there's perhaps the drop that we're seeing, in that context, it's possible that Napa County has actually retained more of its immigrants than that it could have been worse. That's one way that social scientists often look at things, right? If you're trying to estimate the impact, well, you'd have to think also, well, if you weren't doing, for instance, all this good work with the immigrant communities, could it have been worse, right? And so I think that's also another perspective, but it does require more data, but also, not just numbers, really, I would say probably qualitative data to better understand from people who know the communities very well, where are people going? Because from the few conversations I've had here, and it's very few, affordability always came up, right? And in many cases, people have said, even nearby, it's a little bit more affordable, but not that much more. Need to go even further, right? And so clearly, there's a lot of knowledge in this room maybe we should do that as our next project.
I have an audience question. Was the economic impact taking into account the loss of transient occupancy tax because of the loss of hospitality workers?
What it did do is it took into account that if you lose, no, it didn't take that into account specifically, no. It took into account the loss of income of those workers and the impact on the economy, but not on the collection side, it wasn't the tax collection side, it wasn't specific to the industry tax. So I would say no. So that's why I said we use conservative assumptions, right? And if you do think about that, I think you'd have far greater multiplier effects.
If you talk to the, and this talking really is more to Terrence than Bill.
Okay.
If you talk to the growers and the vendors, there are quite a few of the people who were around who started in the 70s and 80s will tell you they have had workers there for 30 or 40 years who are retiring now, which is part of the labor problem. But a lot of those people were naturalized because of Reagan's amnesty, and then for several years you could get your citizenship sponsored by an employer. It got much more difficult in the last few decades, but there's a whole generation in Napa that sort of made their homes here 30, 40 years ago.
Mr. Pierce, I'm a pediatrician on town, and I was wondering, did you look at the differences in birth rates between non-Latino and Latino populations?
We did not.
No.
What do you observe? Can you say?
I would expect that it would be higher in the Latino.
Overall, that's what it is nationwide, yes.
Nationwide.
Yeah.
And the same, I would suspect that in the school system,
Mm-hmm.
the majority of students are Latino.
Yes, that we found. It was 60% of all children in the K through 12 education, in K through 12, identified as Latino.
The Latino population is overall younger and more childbearing ages than the non-Latino.
So here's an audience question. How does the use of social services like Medi-Cal compare between documented, undocumented, and native-born people?
Yes, so on that question, I could speak for 3 hours because I work on public benefits, and so I'll give you the short version. This is, the way that we looked at it, we just looked at the low-income population, assuming that they're eligible, that's the point. They're income eligible, but you have to be immigration status eligible. And in fact, of course, if you're you cannot have access to certain programs if you are not eligible. Now, yes, there's Medi-Cal. that has exceptions, that has broadened eligibility for certain age groups. And that was over time too. And not all of the years that are in the data there would cover Medi-Cal, but we do have, if you're interested, we did a paper just on Medicaid, and we have state level data that breaks down between the US born and the foreign born population. It's clear that Medi-Cal is a big part, and the ACA expansion is a big part of why you have such high health insurance coverage in the county and in the state, even amongst those who federally are ineligible, but at the state level they are. So in this case, in the data, it doesn't matter whether you're federally or state level eligible. But yes, so it's a great question. Thank you.
All right, we're entering our twilight moments. Maybe one more question?
It seems like affordable housing is one of the major problems in this. If the affordable housing situation was corrected, we provided more affordable housing. Do you have any sense of whether the workforce that are working in our area but live outside, would they still be interested in living in our county?
I feel like this is a Terrence question.
Well, I'll give you a Terrence answer. I mean, evermore, I think our strategy seems to be by default that we export our housing stock and import our labor force every day. And surely people would rather spend more time closer to their workplace and closer to their kids' schools and their houses of worship, etc. That's how I am blessed with like a 2-minute commute if I catch the green lights, and there's 6 of them. You know, that's a good life, especially when gas is $6.25 a gallon. But I don't think we know that. We would just be riffing on possibilities.
Yeah, completely agreed. I do have one question.
Yeah.
The question about the counties, the neighboring counties. How is there a lot of collaboration or initiatives that you see as being that could address some of these issues, or how does it work in terms of the way the counties with Napa County, especially Solano, let's say?
I mean, here I'll confess to being a deeply provincial character. So our job is to think constantly about Napa County, you know, a bit like the Safeway shopping cart. If you try to push me off the lot, my wheels turn sideways. That may sound like a philosophy that's an excuse for a lack of innovative thinking, but that is the charter of this foundation, is to be attentive to the needs of the residents of this community. And there's surely stuff we like. Here's a story. It'll be short. Years ago, we started an ADU housing accelerator in partnership with our sister community foundation in Sonoma to help people build accessory dwelling units, because the state passed a bunch of laws to make it much easier for homeowners. And that has served both Napa County and Sonoma County, and now Marin is part of the picture too. So occasionally we pick our heads up and look around and do find things to do, but usually only if there's another funder in that other geography. And sadly, Solano is not as blessed as we are in terms of like philanthropic capital. Mm-hmm. But it's a good thing to consider, because it's like, you know, many of our people are in our workforce are coming from there every day.
Yeah.
For sure. Okay, how about a big hand for Valerie?
Thank you. Thank you.